Hello and welcome to the Effective Literacy Podcast. I'm Victoria.
And I'm Anna.
And we are excited to have you with us today. If today is your first day with us, we want you to know that we are educators and we have a passion for reading and all things literacy. We've come together on this podcast in an effort to better understand the newest research around reading pedagogy. We've noticed a trend towards more phonics, more foundational skills, and less emphasis on content knowledge, language development, making meaning, and effective expression. So to make sense of this all, we're interviewing experts from across the nation with extensive knowledge in literacy and multilingual education to have discussions about how to support our students, specifically our multilingual learners, in becoming literate individuals by the time that they graduate.
So today's episode is a little bit different. So Victoria and I have been in education collectively for over 40 years. And when, if you have listened to our previous episodes, you know that we used to work together. And when we worked together, we started this practice of bouncing ideas off of each other after we went to a conference or read a theory book. And even, we haven't technically worked together for quite some time now. We still engage in the same practice where sometimes Victoria will reach out to me or I'll text her and say, hey, I need to talk about this webinar that I just attended with somebody. Like, can you help me debrief this? Can you help me make some meaning? So that's what we are going to do. We're going to talk about these recent interviews that we've done. And luckily today we have a special guest with us that I'll introduce in just a minute. But today we're making meaning of the conversation that we had with Dr.Socorro Herrera and Dr. Ester de Jong. And if you haven't already listened to those episodes, you might want to go back and take a listen to those before you listen to the episode. But of course, if you don't feel like doing that and you're just thinking, oh, no, I just want to listen to this, then stay with us because we will give you the scoop and then you may want to go back and listen to those. So today we have invited fellow educator Lillie, and I wrote down phonetically how to say your name, Lillie Ruvalcaba. Did I say it right?
You did. Thank you.
Yay. See, you taught me something. This is important that we ask people, right? Teach me how to say your name. So Lillie, we are so excited that you are here to make some meaning with us. But before we get into that, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience in education and multilingualism and literacy?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you both so much for having me here tonight with you guys. I am Lillie Ruvalcaba. I am the English learner teacher on special assignment for Mountain View School District. This is actually my 35th year in education with Mountain View School District. I actually started, you could do the math, when I was 18 as an instructional aide in a bilingual first grade classroom. And so it was an interesting experience for me because I'm actually the youngest of 5 children, born here in Los Angeles. And I grew up as a simultaneous bilingual. Being the youngest, I had older brothers and sisters who were already attending elementary schools that were monolingual English teaching, but I had my mom and my dad speaking Spanish to me at home. And so I made a lot of connections with the students that I was assisting as an instructional aide in Mountain View and was very excited about the connections I saw the kids making from their primary language and English. So I switched majors right away from political science into education, and I became a teacher after 3 years. So I graduated early from college and started teaching at 21. So I spent the majority of my time in elementary school teaching kids kinder through 3rd grade in both bilingual Spanish and structured English immersion settings. Before I became a curriculum and instruction TOSA, and now the EL TOSA, and an adjunct professor at Whittier College, where I teach second language acquisition methods and theory. So I'm very excited to share what I gleaned from both Dr. Herrera and Dr. de Jong's interviews with you guys.
Awesome. Well, you and I have very similar paths, so I think that this is going to be a fun conversation. Oh, so let's get right into it. Dr. Herrera, she was just so fascinating to talk to, and she had so many wonderful stories, and as well as great research that she really connected to. And then, of course, Dr. Jong she was so fun to talk to. Victoria and I were just so honored to spend that time with her. These meaning-making episodes are really centered around a couple of questions. And so the first question is, we all went back and we listened again. And oftentimes Victoria and I, when we would have our conversations, we would ask each other, like, okay, so what's still resonating with you? What's sticking with you? Is there something that's helping you better understand what you went to that training for? So for our episodes, of course, they're around effective literacy. So we would love to know, are there anything, points that are sticking out to you still that are still impacting your work and helping you when you think about what is effective literacy?
I think that the theme that really resonated in both of the interviews was the importance of culturally responsive pedagogy in the joy of learning, right? And we know that our students come to the classroom with that vast array of cultural and linguistic knowledge, whichever language they bring to the classroom, and that as teachers, it's so important for us to really take the time to get to know what our students are bringing to the classroom, to embrace it, to celebrate it, and to really view all of those experiences as assets to the learning environment in our classroom. And so that really stuck out to me.
Absolutely. And I think, especially as a new teacher, you're jumping right in, you're thinking, let me get right into this curriculum and I need to make sure I stay on pace with the veteran teacher who's next door to me. But I think both of them really gave us that permission to be able to really slow down and think about, who are my students? What experiences do they already bring that I can build upon? And then how can I take components of the curriculum or components of literature to make sure that I'm really honoring what it is that they're bringing into the classroom?
Absolutely. And, pretty early on in my teaching career, I was asked to be trained in Descubriendo la Lectura, which is reading recovery for bilingual students. And what they have is 10 days of roaming around the known. Like as much as we want to jump in to get to the learning and start, accelerating our students' learning, we have to take the time to get to know everything that they bring with them, whether it's in English or Spanish or whatever that primary language may be, so that we can really leverage that knowledge to start building and making those connections for them when it comes to literacy and learning. So really taking the time to start smart with our kids, right? And make sure that when we are setting up that classroom at the beginning of the year, we know who's on our roster. And really thinking about, as Dr. De Jong said, are there books that are reflective of our students in the classroom? Are there resources that they can look at and identify? Are there visuals of the students who look like them in our classroom? Is there language represented on the walls? Really making that classroom a place of joy where they can talk about what they see on the wall, where there's that excitement and enthusiasm and sense of belonging.
100%. I think that as a former lower grade elementary school teacher too, it's such a great opportunity for us to bring that in, right? They haven't learned yet that maybe like you don't want to know what happened to not that you don't want to know, but that they don't need to tell you every single detail of their life, but is an early elementary teacher and something that we can take all the way up. And when we listen to those stories from children, when we listen to our students and hear who they are and then bring those things into the classroom, it really creates that classroom that students know they belong to. Right. That they want to come to, that they want to be in, and that they know that their story has value. And that trust is then really how we then move students forward, right? When we talk about, okay, it's going to get a little tricky here because now we're going to learn how to read some harder words. They're like, okay, Maestra, like, yes, let's do that. I can totally do that because you get me. I trust you. Versus if we just try and hit the ground running, like, okay, day one, let's hit it. They're kind of like, I don't know about this, right? I don't know if I want to move forward here.
Right. And as you were saying, that's true for all ages. I see that even with my college students, right? If you take that time to really lower the affective filter, then the learning can begin, right? That learning can blossom exponentially. So absolutely, it's important to set that stage.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of making me think about, and we talked about this before we started recording, but a little bit though of that theme that, Socorro had around the withering on the vine. And, if you see your kiddos showing behavior that says, I don't really want to do this, right? With little kids, they fall off their rug spots or they start poking somebody with a pencil. For middle schoolers and high schoolers, they put that hoodie on and say, not into it. If we see that withering, then we can respond to it. What do you need, right? Like if we have a plant that we're trying to grow and the leaves are starting to droop, is it that I need to move you to the sun? Is it that I need to give you more water? Do you need fertilizer? If we know who our students are, when they start to wither, instead of saying, come on, let's just pull you along down the road, we can really think about, well, who's that kiddo? What's this behavior telling me? And how can I help them so that they can get back on the right track?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, planning alongside teachers and really looking at our lessons and what is it that we're going to do to actually excite our children? What kind of experience are we going to provide that's going to allow them to tap into their prior knowledge, to make those connections, to motivate them, to show them that this lesson is going to be interesting to them, that there's value. So how are we going to hook them into that learning before we start introducing and drilling down into the nitty gritty of the lesson, right? So going from something that is known and motivating into the nuances of, in this case, the language or the foundational skill, and then bringing it back out into a meaningful context, whether it's through some sort of partner talk, collaborative group activity, into a final presentation or some sort of a writing. But it's engaging them. It's hooking them with their known, tapping that prior knowledge, and then inviting them into new learning. Otherwise, like you said, if there is no connection, they're going to wither on the vine. We're going to sound like Charlie Brown's teacher, right? If anybody watches Charlie Brown anymore, we're going to be the wah, 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 and they're going to check out. And, that is not good for our students. We don't want that for our kids. And we're creating more work for ourselves as educators, because when they come back tomorrow, you're going to say, well, I taught that. They didn't get it, and so how can we as teachers strategically plan so that our time is really used valuably, right? So that we're quickly making those connections. It's to the students' benefit and it's to ours as well, to get to know them in order to create those hooks into learning, right? Or grow those roots even deeper, at a deeper level.
So I want to talk about this idea that Socorro talked about, like harvesting the language, right? And harvesting the home language, and really making sure that we're deepening those roots, right? Mm-hmm. But then Esther also talked about this idea of that effective classroom, like it's going to be noisy, that you're going to hear these different languages, that you're going to have that rich library full of these different languages. There's going to be these real life things. And I kept thinking about how those two images so connect to each other, that we're harvesting language by creating language, right? And the more that you're harvesting, the more you're going to see, the more you're going to hear, the more you're going to feel. And this idea that we have, extra books, right? That we get to buy these books, that we buy books in our students' home languages, and having that print rich source in the classroom, I think is so key.
Absolutely. And, when we think about multilingual learners coming to our classroom, they come to school with not just the task of becoming literate, but becoming literate in English, their second language, while simultaneously learning that new language and everything that it entails. And so, we're talking about new vocabulary, everyday and academic language structures. For some, a whole new alphabetical system with new sounds, new phonemes that don't even exist in their primary language. It's a heavy load to carry, especially for kids who have only been on this planet like 5 or so years, right? We're asking a lot. So it really benefits all of us to get to know what they know in both languages so that we can, again, grow those dendrites or those neural pathways into literacy. And by having those books available to students that say we're choosing to teach this book in English, this read aloud, by having copies of that available to them in their primary language that they can read at home, or there's an audiobook available that they can read at home, we're giving them that prior knowledge in their language so that they can come to the lesson ready and make those connections, right? And so really understanding the value of recognizing that common underlying proficiency that Jim Cummins talks about. Because when we know those things, it's almost like being a detective as a teacher, right? Like you're looking at which pieces of this puzzle can I put together for the child so that they could be successful in the world of literacy. So absolutely making sure that they have textbooks or read alouds or, print in their primary language to make those connections to home.
And Lillie, like I just want to give a shout out too that doesn't stop after the primary grades, right? And I think about like my senior AP class, and that I had a number of English learners in the class, and I didn't know like native son came in so many different languages, but my students would read the text in their home language. They would participate in classroom discussions in English, and then we would really support that reading of the English text for the analysis of the writing. And so that doesn't stop at the early grades.
Right. And there are strategies like translanguaging or así se dice from Kathy Escamilla that we carve out that time in our day as teachers, regardless of the age level of the students that we're teaching, to dissect those nuances of the language. Say, in Spanish, we have dichos. In English, we have figurative language. And so they don't directly translate all the time. And if, we don't have that opportunity in the classroom to clarify any potential misconceptions because of figurative language or the nuances of English with our kids, we may see a lack of comprehension on their part. So I like that both of the ladies talked about making a safe space to really dive deeper into the language and ask those questions, right? Creating that safe environment to have those conversations and really harness or harvest the fruits of their primary language so that we can grow from there.
Mm-hmm. And I think, I'm a monolingual teacher, now a monolingual administrator, but I also think that it's incredibly important. And one of the things that when they were talking about having the books in the library, I think it was Esther that was talking about the library books. And, I may not be teaching them. Mm-hmm. I may not be instructing from a dual language program because my school might not have that, but me making sure that I have books that represent my family's primary language also helps me to make sure that I'm equally valuing language, right? That it's not just the language of instruction that is valuable, but it's that all of these languages, all of these experiences that I'm trying to reflect in my library, that really makes sure that language of instruction is valuable, but at the same time that those primary languages that may not be reflected in language of instruction, that doesn't mean that they're not valuable. It just means that this is what our program does. And so I think it's really important that when we think about what we're creating in our classroom environment or at the site environment, regardless of what our language instruction or our program is, that we are making sure, and I think it was Dr. Lori Olson a couple episodes ago that really stuck with me, thinking about making sure families feel not only invited, but also this place of belonging. And I can do that by reflecting those primary languages in my classroom, even if they're not language of instruction.
Right. Dr. Socorro Herrera also talked about that, right? She talked about the importance of creating that family bridge to be able to connect to the rich traditions of oral storytelling, of the rhymes and the rhythm of and the beauty of the language, of harnessing, their understanding of the dichos, of prayers and of sermons and that, all involves literal and figurative language. And so something that we've seen, because, 35 years, we've seen that pendulum swing, is even in our parents, having parents come to us and say, don't speak in Spanish, no hables con mi hijo en español, solamente inglés. Don't talk to them in Spanish, just English. And so it's having to helps parents and teachers come to an understanding of the value, the importance of continuing to grow that primary language, because that is the foundation, and so building that family bridge through many parent workshops also, inviting in your instructional coaches or your experts in your district or from outside your county offices to have those meetings with parents and encourage them to continue to speak to their children in their primary language, to read to them in that language, to expose them to their alphabetic system, because once they understand, the parents understand the concept that everything I'm teaching them in their primary language is going to transfer, right? You're going to have a lot of positive transfer into English. They're actually helping us as teachers, right? And so that makes our job that much easier, because even if I don't speak Spanish, I can look up a list of cognates and I can say, this is similar in English and in Spanish, or this is similar, this sound is similar in Vietnamese and English. Or, hey, you know what? Those diphthongs don't exist in Spanish. So I, as a teacher, need to make sure that I'm explicitly teaching those. And when I teach those from a meaningful context, drilling down on a whiteboard to this is the sound it makes. Let's hold up that mirror. Let's pronounce that sound. What does that look like? What does that feel like in my mouth? And then putting it into writing. I am intentionally setting up echoes in my day across the curriculum where they're going to encounter that foundational skill or that language structure, so that they're seeing it, they're repeating it, and they're really, again, growing that root more deeply, right? Building those bridges across languages. So the benefit of continuing to nurture that primary language at home and bringing in parents and families, like you said, they are our partners in this journey. For sure.
Lillie, I love the imagery of echoing, right? That echo that we want to have throughout the day, throughout our units, that we're constantly echoing back to what we've learned. And in this whole thing, it's like that our conversation we're having right now about the assets and making sure that we have all these languages in our classrooms. It also makes me think about something that Ester said. And Ester said, our school systems are still set up to think that we're fixing our kids, that we're fixing their home language. And we need to stop thinking like that, right? That our children are too diverse to think that all of them are in the same place on the same time with the whatever curriculum. We have to stop. And I just think it's such a big shift, right? It's such a big shift from where I was as a student, right? That we have to fix you. We have to fix you. No, we have to celebrate you. We have to celebrate you, use your assets, meet you where you are. And I don't know. I kind of want to talk more about that, but at the same time, my brain hasn't fully formed everything that I'm thinking there.
What are we still thinking about? Like, it doesn't mean what questions do we have, like, that we need answers to, but it's more about, so I've listened to these experts and now we're coming together and like, help me keep thinking about this. Right.
And how do we spread that message to our parents and to our fellow teachers, and so in a couple of the podcasts that I've listened to, I've heard it and I've lived it, where teachers, it's very easy to be your island, right? To close your door and do your thing. But how do we share? And so really having that collaboration among teachers within your grade level or within your school or across schools, to really talk about how do I continue to tap into what our kids know, or how do I build that into my lesson, as opposed to maybe just following this script, like you guys were saying before. Like, how do I do that? And really, how do I explain it to an administrator who maybe is saying, why aren't you on that script? And so how do we help our teachers really advocate for their their professional decisions in the moves that they make during a lesson, as well as for the benefits of their students and their parents. And so that's where I'm thinking, like, how is it that we go about doing that and arming them with the knowledge to be able to effectively explain in a very positive way that what I am doing is moving mountains, right? For my kids.
I think that, I have in my notes of like what I'm still thinking about. And I think if I were a classroom teacher and I were making decisions and doing that sidestepping and really meeting my students where they are and then pulling them back and then doing that back and forth, if I had an administrator ask me, or I had a coach or somebody, or even a teacher, like, tell me why you did that. How come you're not here in the scope and sequence? It was Esther that said that the scope and sequence is designed for English speakers, which is true, right? That's undisputable because, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, that typically in many curriculum, it's written, in your 2 pages and you're supposed to be on unit 1, lesson 1, whatever. And then down on the corner, it's like considerations for English learners. And, that is what it is. I'm not saying that, anything about that, but that's a sidestep. And what we're trying to do is say, if we have a class with English learners, we need to bring that to the center, because this scope and sequence was not written with them as a priority, really thinking about who are my multilingual learners and what is it that they need. That was really about, this is the scope and sequence, and over here to the side, if you have English learners, here's something you could try. And sometimes those are good ideas, and sometimes we know that they're not. So I think that's important for us to give to our teachers, that I'm on the scope and sequence, but this scope and sequence isn't written for my kids. So I sometimes need to do something additional to make sure that I'm meeting their needs.
Right. And I think we know, we have our grade level standards that ultimately, as teachers, that is what we are responsible for, getting our kids to that standard by the end of the school year. And what I like to share with my teacher candidates and with my veteran teachers both is that, if we peel everything back and we look at the framework of, our instructional framework, what is it that we go through? You want to build the field, right? Through those allowing time to explore that background knowledge and provide those meaningful experiences to build schema if our kids don't have it. So that's 1. 2, you want to model that text type or that linguistic structure or that foundational skill. So that's the we do. Then you want to have that joint construction time. What kind of collaborative group work are you going to provide for the students in order to experience that language structure or foundational skill, whatever that is, in a meaningful context? And then ultimately, how are they going to show what they've learned, either with a partner if they're an English learner, a small group, or independently, depending on their English language proficiency level. So if you look at those 4 components within your framework, you as the teacher are going to make the decisions. Is it that you're going to have observation picture file cards, or are you going to have that inquiry chart? Are you going to do a see, think, wonder? What are you going to do there to build that field, right? Then what language structure are you going to teach? Is the standard calling for sequence? Is the standard calling for comparing and contrasting? What language do you need to prepare them to be able to use? And what is that academic vocabulary? Are you going to have pictures of that academic vocabulary in order for them to review, right? Can you send those vocabulary cards home with the students who maybe, I don't speak Spanish or Vietnamese, but the parents do. So they can review those picture cards and that vocabulary in their primary language. They can even write it on the bottom so that I could put it up in my classroom right next to that English vocabulary picture card, and then what is that collaborative group structure that the kids, is it a jigsaw? Is it small group guided reading? What are they going to do together to help make sense of the learning? And then how are they going to show me what they know? What is that ticket out the door for the day or the week? So again, peeling back everything that your program has, going to your framework and pulling in what works for your kids, right? Because you're still teaching that standard. You're still going to get them there. You're just meeting the needs of your unique individuals and celebrating their assets, right? So
Yeah, and so I think I think I want to end it with something that we've kind of circled around and talked about a lot throughout the episode, is Socorro's idea of the withering on the vine, right? And when we see our students withering on the vine, take Esther, it's not about fixing our students. It's about fixing our curriculum.
Yes.
And fixing the way that we're approaching, right? And so Lillie just gave us some amazing ideas of how we might fix that. And so I think that that's the best place to leave this making meeting and really kind of keep us thinking. And so Lillie, thank you for joining us. Thank you for brainstorming with us. And thank you for listening today. We are the Effective Literacy Podcast. For more information and to get access to the resources mentioned today, please visit our show notes at multilingualliteracy.org and make sure to subscribe to our podcast. We got a lot more interviews to come.